Right. Hello, everyone. Um, my name is Ryota Jonen from the World Movement for Democracy. The World Movement for Democracy empowers democracy movements by connecting democracy activists and practitioners with each other, helping them share their practice, knowledge, and strategy with each other, and positioning them inspire each other under the three main themes: defending democratic space, promoting inclusive governance, and empowering emerging leaders. Today, September 15th, is the International Day of Democracy, as you know. To commemorate this important day, the World Movement for Democracy is pleased to join our forces together with the International IDEA and the National Endowment for Democracy to host this exciting discussion of a battle between democratic and authoritarian narratives that we have been increasingly seeing in recent years. The COVID-19 crisis has definitely exacerbated these certain narratives, arguing that democracy is not suited to handle this crisis. And crisis, and also a democracy society needs a strong man to measure security safety measures for citizens. We are pleased to have great speakers today to help us understand how the democracy is being, the battle of narratives being played, and who are the actors and factors within it, and how we should respond to and win this battle. First speakers we have today in this event is our chairman of the World Movement for Democracy Steering Committee, Jose Ramos-Horta. Dr. Jose Ramos-Horta is a Nobel Peace Laureate and also former president of Timor-Leste, East Timor. He was fighting for independence of his country for 24 years. He was in exile, trying to connect the grassroots activists and Indonesian government to promote the peaceful dialogue between them. For this work, he was recognized to receive the Nobel Peace Prize in 1996. I'm happy to have him here with us. Please, Jose, you have, please make opening remarks. Thank you so much.
And all of you in Washington, Secretariat, who have made tremendous efforts to pull this Zoom conference together. I'm speaking from Dili, Timor-Leste, at the edge of the world. We are in Southeast Asia, and I can begin with some positive news. In the midst of the tragedies of all sorts, not only the pandemic, COVID-19, but the ongoing wars in Syria, Libya, South Sudan, Afghanistan, and elsewhere, Yemen. Here, we largely have escaped the COVID pandemic. For several months, we haven't had a case. All the cases we had back in February, March were imported from Indonesia. Fortunately, they're all mild cases, and they will cure, long return to their respective homes. Right now, we have one single case positive, but also mild. We have enforced strict controls at the borders, but other than that, the situation is largely very normal. Domestic business activities go on, schools are going on, there's public services, church services, etc. Of course, we are suffering like everybody else around the world, the economic impact, fallout of COVID and the global recession. And our democracy, as imperfect as it has always been, is surviving. No one here is using our state of emergency to curtail public opinion, activities by the civil society, etc. So we are, I would say, so far with an oasis of tranquility. But we know democracy is being challenged today as never before since the end of the Cold War. The challenge is not only the result of particular crisis or democratic breakdown, but it has multiple sources. This is what we, the Democracy Steering Committee, said in our statement, the call for a democratic renewal in November 2015. Nearly 5 years after the statement, we see challenges to democracy are far greater, with more sophisticated authoritarian threats, much more complex information space, and now COVID-19. This is why the recent call for defend democracy signed by more than 500 political, civil leaders, intellectuals is so important that we continue to strive to mobilize political leadership to protect democratic practice, mobilize citizens to rebuild their faith in democracy. We are often defending ourselves and reacting to attacks on democracy. If you play sports, you know the best defense is an offense. We democracy believers need to make the stronger case, a stronger case for democracy while responding to threats. But of course, democracy has to deliver, has to deliver what I would call democracy dividends, freedom dividends, peace dividends, particularly for the working classes, for the workers, for the youth, the students, the impoverished people in the periphery of the world. Because otherwise, if democracy, liberal democracy, does not deliver the basic needs of the people, then we give rise, our failure gives rise to authoritarianism, to populism, to demagogues. This is what happened in parts of Asia, in Europe, and elsewhere. We need to show this and communicate effectively. This is what the World Movement Steering Committee extensively discussed when it met last year. To win a battle of narratives, we also need to find and build bridges over deep divides that we see in our societies. And we see it across Europe. We see it in the United States, in Latin America, in Asia. Those divides are political, cultural, economic, ethnic, and perhaps generational. Great to have Ana Gomes with us, a great lady. I don't know whether to make a comparison. I'm not very good with European history or French history, but whether to compare Ana Gomes to Joan d'Arc is an appropriate comparison. But she is such a fighter. She is really an amazing woman. When everybody was silent on corruption in Angola, on abuse, she spoke out in the European Parliament in her own country. And a tireless fighter, and so glad she is with us. But I cannot miss this opportunity on behalf of all of us, World Democracy Movement, to extend to Ana our deep sympathy for the loss of her husband, her great husband, Ambassador Antonio Franco, whom I knew well. And and also with another sad note, a few weeks ago, Lord Kreiner, president of IRI, International Republic Institute, also left us. Used to joke in part with Lord Kreiner that he was my favorite Republican and a wonderful human being. He had the best of the Republicans, the best of the Americans, very self-effacing, approachable, compassionate. And we lost a great leader in IRI. IRI, which has been very much engaged in Timor-Leste for now 20 years in helping us building, consolidating our democracy and democratic institutions. So to all of you, in the Secretariat, once again, my deep appreciation for your efforts. I have not been a great president because mostly I let you people in Washington do the work. And also thank the distinguished speakers who will listen soon for accepting to join us in this global conversation on the challenges to democracy. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Jose, for sharing your wisdom as always. And now I'd like to invite Mrs. Ana Gomes. She was the member of European Parliament until last year, and she would moderate the following conversation with experts and activists about the battle of narratives. In the European Parliament, as Jose mentioned, she was a strong advocate for united Europe and promotion of human rights, democracy, and rule of law in EU and also around the world. From 1999 until 2003, she was the head of Portuguese intersection and ambassador in Indonesia. During that time, she played a very important role in supporting independence of Timor-Leste. And that's why you see that Jose and Ana are very close, as he mentioned right now. Now, I'd like to invite Ana to take the floor and run this conversation. Thank you very much, Ana. Ana, you need to unmute, please.
Is that okay now? Because I was forced to do some creative thinking and find my car. There was a power outing in my whole areas, unusual. Anyhow, here I am, and it's a pleasure to have been introduced to you by my dear old friend and co-plotter Jose Ramos-Horta, the former president of Timor-Leste and a Nobel winner. Great, without further ado, let's go into the discussion. We have a distinguished panel, group of panelists. And of course, first of all, I would like to mention Anne Applebaum, who is well known, a Pulitzer Prize winning historian, someone who has extensively written about exactly the problems we are now discussing. It was quite significant, the article she wrote recently, How to Beat Populists When Facts Don't Matter, which says a lot in itself in the title. We are eager to listen to Anne. We have Larry Diamond, of course, from Professor of Sociology and Political Science from Stanford University, distinguished senior fellow of Hoover Institution and Freeman Spogli Institute. And of course, we're eager to listen to him as well. Garry Kasparov, who doesn't know him, he was the youngest world chess champion in the history at the age of 22 in 1985, but he is a champion for human rights and freedom in Russia, and he is working hard to empower civic reaction in Russia. I'm not sure that at this moment we have Bobi Wine, but I hope we will be joined by him because he's now in my league as a presidential candidate for the 2021 election, in his case, in his home country, Uganda. He's a singer, he's been an extraordinary activist promoting youth participation. So I hope we can get him. We have Annouchka Wijesinghe, who is a young activist from Sri Lanka. She's working to empower communities for democracy, for pluralism, and also very savvy on the current trend to, of course, make use of the social networks for the most outrageous, but as well for the most encouraging ideas. Omaid Sharifi is an artivist. He combines art with activism in his home country, Afghanistan, using the power of art and culture for a transformational work in his society, mobilizing youths and all against corruption and for good governance. And we have Cynthia Mbamalu, who's a lawyer in Nigeria, a dedicated human rights and gender rights activist. She is one of the leaders of Not Too Young to Run, who has been managing to get fantastic young people running for election and getting elected in Nigeria, in West Africa. And she provides mentorship to young female politicians and young women. So it's a great panel. Thank you to the World Movement for Democracy for having gathered us all here. And let's start the conversation. I will immediately ask maybe Anne and maybe then Garry Kasparov could also answer these questions. How do we understand the appeal of anti-democratic narratives now? What is this vogue of so-called illiberal democracy, which is, of course, an oxymoron, because there is no illiberal democracy? What actors and factors are influencing these narratives? And what is the role of the information space, the media outlet, the traditional ones, but as well the digital ones, the social media, playing in indeed not just providing this space for these authoritarian narratives, but also for all of us who want democracy to regenerate, to indeed use them to fight all these authoritarian projects. Anne, would you like to answer?
Sure, thank you very much. You know, there are a lot of answers to that question, but let me focus on just three. One, as you said, we are going through an information revolution of a really profound kind. I mean, the only one of this scale that I can think of is the invention of the printing press, you know, many centuries ago, which also had enormous political implications and also led in Europe to, you know, the Protestant Reformation and eventually actually religious warfare. So this is a real change in the way that people can speak to each other, in the way politics can be organized. And we're seeing it, and it's undermining all kinds of regimes and all kinds of governments, democratic and non-democratic. Unfortunately, the nature in particular of social media, which is the you know the tool that is now, you know, popular tool for communication in all of our countries, is that it encourages divisions between people, and it also encourages and spreads any kind of narrative or any kind of argument that is particularly emotional or angry. And so it's simply a fact that anger spreads faster on the internet, that the algorithms encourage you know, people to you know, high levels of emotion. They do not encourage rational debate. And they also have the effect of enabling people to surround themselves just with people who agree with them. One of the things that democracy requires in order to function is a kind of shared public space. And in many countries, I mean, many countries, but especially those that don't have good state television or some kind of public network or public broadcaster, which is, you know, probably the majority, you now have the phenomenon of people living in absolutely different information spheres, which makes it hard, not just about different opinions, but different facts, and makes it much harder for people to talk to one another. This is happening at a time of really great economic and demographic change. And so I'd say that's also the second reason. If you look back in history, democracies are, you know, people become anxious and people begin to long for simple solutions in times when things are very complicated and all of us are undergoing economic change again, and sometimes in some cases demographic change at speed that we're not used to. And the third thing I would mention, and I'm sure others will get back to this in the conversation, we really are now living at a time, I would not say this is a Cold War, that's absolutely the wrong word, but we are living at a time when authoritarian powers are seeking to spread their ideas and sell their ideas in the democratic world with much more energy than they did, a decade ago or 2 decades ago. And so whether it's China, whether it's Russia, whether it's Iran, there are different actors in different parts of the world. They having understood how the new information economy works, having understood that they can now intervene more easily in democratic debates than they used to, they have become aware that of the possibilities and are using them to the full. And these are the reasons why I believe that democracy is under more challenge right now than it has been in many decades.
The question was about the liberal democracy, and I want to start by saying that the moment you see an adjective added to democracy, something is wrong. Soviet Union used the term people's democracy in occupied Eastern Europe. Putin's regime used words like managed democracy, sovereign democracy, and it becomes quite popular to actually find an adjective explaining democracy. And that's, for me, it's a number one indicator that democracy has been used as a tool to promote undemocratic rule. Dictatorship, they always use propaganda to tell their repressed citizens that things would be much worse in a democracy or worse without a dear leader. And as Anne already said, so the economic hardship, division, and chaos can lead people to look for alternatives, including anti-democratic ones. And it's quite natural to lose faith in a system if you think the system doesn't work for you. If economy is bad, and if you think that a certain autocratic leader might do better for you or your political tribe, then you look elsewhere. And the problem is that while autocrats, would-be autocrats, they manage to actually find the soft spots in the modern political system, exploiting the fact that many mainstream political leaders were not willing to ask tough questions. So they immediately come up with these tough questions and they provide horrible answers. But at the end of the day, if no one else is talking about these problems, they look like the only game in town. And demagogues can make the strong hand sound very appealing. And they promise order, of course, or law and order, as a popular Twitter personality likes to say. People cannot realize that that will be an order in a prison until it's too late. And once demagogues take power, they use it to dismantle democratic institutions and use propaganda to weaken truth in informational space, and also the popular trust in democracy. And soon, you start hearing, oh, well, maybe it's not, a full-blown democracy, but the leader is popular. That's, what we have been hearing about Putin for many years. And the rise of the liberal democracies, as in Hungary, Poland, or Turkey, among others, is usually a combination of all these factors. Dissatisfaction with the status quo, sharp political divisions, often inflamed, and social issues, or immigrants, and the appearance of a leader, of a strong leader, who is eager to grasp personal power when the system is too weak to stop him. As just following to what Anne said, technology works for autocrats because we yet to find a way to strengthen democratic institutions. Typically, fake news are always far more receptive by the large audience than something that they think it's a simple routine.
Thank you, Garry. And now let me turn to Larry Diamond, exactly building on what has just been said, that there is this loss of faith in governance that doesn't deliver on social or other matters of crucial importance for the people. As José Ramos-Horta said, democracy has to deliver. Aren't there problems of equality, this delivering of democracy and the promise of equality of opportunities, the fight against corruption, an essential element that has been missing in democracies, and that's why populists and authoritarianists are building on it? Larry, would you like to answer to this and also focus on the generational aspects of this crisis of trust? What are the differences in expectations of governance?
Larry, please unmute.
Yeah, I thanked Anna. Sorry, I had been muted by the host. I said it was a great honor to be on this panel with all of my fellow panelists. Anna, I think it's better to let younger people, Bobi and Cynthia, speak to the generational issues. I want to make a few points, though, to carry the conversation, and maybe Bridget to Cynthia and to Bobi Wine, who I think you're going to turn to next. Mm-hmm. First of all, of course, democracy has to perform better, both in addressing the economic and social anxieties and the great transitions that Anne spoke about, and in dealing with the immediate challenge of COVID. I'm going to be brutally honest here. When we were drafting the statement on democratic renewal, I was a bit uneasy about the claims, which I helped to add language to, about the superior capacity of democracies to address crises like COVID-19 pandemic, because anytime we pin the case for democracy purely on performance, we risk the danger that an authoritarian regime, whether it be Nazi Germany in the early days of Hitler's rise, or Mussolini and after he came to power in the 1920s, or Xi Jinping's China today, or some twisted and lying version of what Putin claims he's doing to restore strength and governability in Russia, can come along and claim, well, we perform better than you do. Now, it's a distortion, because we don't really know in countries like Ethiopia and a lot of other authoritarian regimes, Russia for sure, we don't really know what the death rate is from COVID-19. We can't even be sure in democracies with transparent information, but we have to bear in mind that authoritarian regimes lie about their performance. And one of the most natural reflexes of authoritarian regimes is to lie about virtually everything, to distort the truth, to distort the facts. And Anne knows very well from her study of Soviet history, and Garry as well, to manufacture statistics. So it's pretty well widely assumed that China's economic growth rate now that it reports every year is probably reported to be, maybe 2 percentage points higher than it really is, and that they start with the growth rate they want to release and then work backwards to find the statistics to justify it. But the truth is, we can't ignore it, that if you look at countries that have some degree of more more of economic wealth or resources, the democracies are the most prominent democracies are performing very poorly. And, you know, if you go to a website, I can tell you, or you can Google on the statistics from COVID, you know, the top countries are in Latin America. Peru is the worst in the world. Chile is very bad. Brazil is about number 6 in the world. The US is number 9 in the world in terms of deaths per million. This is not a good performance. The second point I want to make is that we need to undertake some reforms, I think, to improve our capacity to reform. Addressing the social media question that Anne spoke to is a longer term one. But leadership makes a big difference. And part of the challenge here is when you have populist leaders who deny science, deny the basis of transmission of COVID-19, deny climate change. We're in the midst of, you know, existential fires here in California now, and we have a national leader who denies that climate change even exists as a human activity-driven phenomenon. It doesn't help. And this is all part of the populist phenomenon that is now gripping democracies around the world that everybody is familiar with. We are finding some hopeful strategies. You have seen them in Turkey with the campaign of radical love by the Republican People's Party that won some surprising municipal races. With the near victory, it didn't happen, but Anne might say more about it, of the opposition presidential candidate in Poland who came a long distance to almost win against great odds. With the victories of the mayors in Warsaw and Budapest and so on, of the kind of strategies that can bridge divides and make inroads against illiberal populism. And I would just say we are in a period, because of the drivers that Anne spoke about, of deepening polarization. That is one of the consequences of all these structural factors and others that Anne laid out. And the response by Democrats around the world, I think it is the response that Bobi is trying to generate in his very brave presidential campaign in Uganda, is not to play into the polarization, but to transcend it. I cannot emphasize the importance enough of this strategy. If you try and drill down into polarization, you play into the hands of authoritarian populists. And if you try and transcend it by appealing to people who might have supported these rulers and giving them a positive vision of the future, that's how you mobilize democratic change.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just want to make one more point before you turn to the other speakers. One of the members of the steering committee of the World Movement for Democracy, and someone well known to Bobi, Nicholas Apio, is now under assault in Kampala. His home has been broken into. All of his computers and sensitive equipment have been stolen by what seems to be an assault by elements of the state. And people like many of my colleagues here, including Bobi, who was viciously assaulted, are in very great danger, and it's very important that the World Movement for Democracy stand with them.
Well, thank you, Larry, and thank you in particular for calling out for this support for our friends in Uganda who are facing repression, like our fellow Nicholas Opio. And let's immediately turn to Bobi Wine, because he himself has experienced prison and beating and being accused of treason. Now he's a member of parliament and a presidential candidate. So Bobi Wine, great to have you with us. We were really thrilled, and we need to hear you. Tell us you're young, you're talking to young people. How do you see these generational aspects now being taken up in this crisis of trust? How do you play offensive against all this nasty rhetoric that supports populism, or that wants to play that populist card against democratic governance in your country in particular, which has been run by someone for over 34 years. It's about time. So Bobi, you have the floor. Tell us, what are the challenges?
Thank you very much, friends. I'm really honored to be part of this world movement for democracy and to share my thoughts. I want to believe that I'm sharing thoughts representing me, but also representing millions and millions of Ugandans, especially the young people who have massively taken a plunge into the politics of our country. I must mention that for a long time, the young people of Uganda have been in some way disconnected from the politics of their country, you know, considering the state efforts, denying them political education and banning it from schools, and also making sure that things like alcohol are the ones that are promoted, but not national issues. Thanks to the pain that young people have been going through, and thanks to those that came before us, now I can boast that Ugandans have massively gotten involved in the leadership of their country. However, like all authoritarian, you know, dictatorships in the past, in Uganda, there is a massive attack on every last bit of democratic principle that we have. You just mentioned that one of the great activists from Uganda, Nicholas Opio, is under attack. But again, we who get under state attack and are lucky enough to catch the eye of the world, celebrate that. Otherwise, hundreds of thousands of people go through the same every day. We've seen Ugandans tortured, arrested, some of them are kidnapped, and others have disappeared, but we continue to move. The most important thing with our generation is that there has been a massive demand for equal rights, for democracy. And yes, there is a big offensive of propaganda trying to send fear out from the regime through the beatings. And of course, a lot of taxpayer money is being spent to compromise those young people and to change the narrative. Like one speaker rightly noted, that the regime has every effort to you know, cast doubt in the forces of change and to create a narrative that indeed people are not well, but they would probably be worse off if the, you know, sovereign leader loses power. This is the way that our nation has been governed under military dictatorship for the last close to 35 years. There's every effort for Ugandans to rise up. We are going into the election in next year, 2021. I am glad that by now we have made every effort, and this is not only credited to me, but it's credited to all the forces of change, those that came way before me, and yes, those that came after me. There is a united voice that seems to be asking for change. Ugandans are preparing for the election. This election is like no other, because unlike the past where General Yoweri Museveni has been facing competition from the usual traditional politicians, from the usual traditional political party, we in the past, to be precise, right from 2017, started a mass movement called the People Power Movement. This is what has in a great way inspired Ugandans to, you know, get involved in their politics. And now we are. What we are dealing with is that we are pushing back against the Museveni regime and other despots who use populist propaganda to keep people in fear. It's almost unbelievable to see a person of my age pushing back against the regime. When you called me a young person, yes, I could be 38 years of age, but for me, this is too old already in Uganda. I'm very glad that other young people have picked it, and indeed, it is now catching a fire. We use music and social media and other things. Personally, I've been using music for the last more than 15 years. And my music is not just entertainment, but we call it edutainment, meaning education mixed with entertainment. I am glad that that, in a way, attracted the attention of young people who had, in a great way, been disconnected from politics and thinking that indeed there is a class that is supposed to rule over them while they are supposed to bear the burden of taxes and everything. But today, I am glad to report that the young people of Uganda actually feel like they own the country. This has increased the pushback against the regime, and having excited these young people and encouraged them to register as voters, we have seen a mass expansion in the voter population. And we are confident that in 2020, we are going to be able to overwhelm the dictatorship. Sorry, in 2021, did I say 2020? Maybe I'm thinking futuristically. Yeah, we are confident that in 2021, we are going to win the election. However, this has not gone unchallenged by the regime, because right now we are living every day as if it is the last day. Like all despots do in Uganda, we have been faced by arrests, illegal detention. You know, our young political party has been attacked. Many propped up charges have been brought up against me. Besides the cases that were slapped on us in Arua, I was charged for treason, illegal possession of firearms, etc., etc. But again, here, while I'm battling a charge of annoying the president, did you know there is such a charge as annoying the president? Well, I'm battling with one and others, including
Bobby. Thank you. We are running short of time. So thank you so much. All the best. We are with you and all Nicholas and all those fighting for democracy in Uganda. And we look forward to see the results of this fight that you carry with so many young people behind you. And but now building on that, let me now turn to Annouchka. Annouchka, a crucial tool these days is, of course, the information technologies. It can be used for good, but it can be used for promoting populism and authoritarianism. How do you see this being used in an offensive for democracy, in rebuilding public confidence in democracy, in restoring the frayed social contract and deliver to the people's needs? How do you see this, Annouchka?
Thank you, Anna.
I'm asking everybody now to be shorter because we are running out of time. Go ahead.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you to the World Movement and for International Idea for inviting me to be a part of this. As Anna and also Anne mentioned, social media is very complicit in the propagation of false narratives and disinformation, and is used in various parts of the world to divide societies. And in my part of the world, in South Asia and Southeast Asia, these narratives on social media often translate into real world violence. And so there's when you look at it, it's very bleak. It's difficult to say what kind of positive role that social media can play. But social media is obviously a platform for expression. I personally believe that the only sustainable solution to disinformation is more expression, and the expression of the truth, the expression of facts, and social media is obviously very pertinent in giving us this platform. But having said that, social media platforms like Facebook, for example, also obviously need to improve their services because of the various examples from all over the world of how these platforms have been used to spread violence and to spread disinformation. and to distort narratives. For example, in Sri Lanka, in and around elections, Facebook is allowed to continue to Facebook allows political parties to continue to use ads, which include content that has been debunked by third-party fact checkers. Now, the fact that the social media platforms allow this content to exist online is something that has been decried all over the world. But the justification they use in countries like the US is that the media, the mainstream media, exists to hold politicians accountable for their lies and for their disinformation. But in my part of the world, this rationale doesn't really apply, because the mainstream media and social media have a sort of a symbiotic relationship where they both manufacture disinformation and are complicit in the spread of this disinformation. So social media, if they don't self-regulate, if they don't adopt tools for transparency, what happens in countries like mine is that the governments will then clamp down on this tool for self-expression, for freedom of expression, in the name of maintaining peace and security. So it's very important that democracy practitioners call for these platforms to self-regulate, because otherwise, and this has happened in our parts of the world, right, where governments clamp down on online expression, and this is a dangerous phenomenon. This is something that we can't encourage. So for the sake of everybody's ability to express themselves, social media platforms have to take more of a responsibility for what they allow online.
Thank you, Annouchka, for bringing up the responsibility of these big social media platforms and the need for regulators, politicians to regulate and to prevent this from continuing to happen. Actually, let me turn now to Omaid. In Afghanistan, he uses art and culture to build a narrative to go against exactly what are the objectives of populism, divide people, and then and ignore facts, because as Applebaum has pointed out in her writings, populists ignore facts, build on fake news and on spreading fake news, and just bringing the facts is not enough. So how to build this narrative? How to build a narrative that will overcome the divide that the populists manage to instill in our societies? Omaid, can you talk about that, about your experience in Afghanistan?
Thank you. I'm honored to be among the distinguished panelist members today. I just wanted to share good news at the beginning. The Afghan government and the Taliban representatives are starting the negotiations in Doha, Qatar. Started this week. This is a very new development for Afghanistan that has been in war for the last 42 years. Basically, all my life, we have been in violence and war, and now we are seeing some rays of hope. So this is hopefully will bring some peace and stability to Afghanistan. I just wanted to come to 3 points, very clear points. One is that the narrative that the Afghan government is promoting, which is the values of the republic, the democracy, the last 20 years of investment in democracy and democratization. And with this, they are hiding all the corruption, the nepotism, the lack of transparency which is happening. As Jose Ramos-Horta said, the dividend for democracy is not there. They just have these names that there's democracy, but it's not for all. It's just not inclusive. The democracy that we are talking about is not explained very well to the people, to farmers, to religious scholars, to teachers in the rural areas of Afghanistan. And then there's the narrative of the Taliban, which they are hiding behind their jihad and the guns and violence. And their narrative is that Afghanistan is invaded and they want to defend the country and take out the foreigners. But for the last 6 months, the foreigners are gone. They have signed an agreement with the United States of America, and they're not attacking the foreigners. They're only attacking the Afghan people. So when we come to us, the young people and the Afghan people, their narrative is that they want an end to all of this violence and nonsense war. They want healing. They want to be able to live a simple life after so long. And the moment the Afghan people and people like us who go on the streets to paint on the big blast walls, we raise questions of corruption and nepotism and lack of transparency against the government, they label us that we are against the values of the Republic. If we raise questions about the terrorism of the Taliban, they label you as infidel and a puppet of democracy or the Americans. So basically the Afghan people narrative is lost. And all these, the government, the Taliban, and all these, I would call them evil forces, are trying to impose their own narratives on the people. And sort of the civic space is shrinking, and the self-censorship for a lot of us is very dangerous. And the cost of defending democracy and democratic values in Afghanistan is by your life, because every day your life is in danger. So what we did with our art and artivism is that we went out on the streets of Afghanistan with a brush and with messages that I see you. I know you're doing corruption. I know you're corrupt. You're not transparent. But if I cannot take you to justice today, we will take you to justice tomorrow, or to the Taliban, or all those actors which are involved in this war in Afghanistan. With murals, with animation, with music, we are going on the streets of Afghanistan, and we are encouraging everybody to come, join in, get a brush and start painting. Raise your voices. These murals on the streets is becoming sort of a voice for the voiceless. And this is how we are introducing a new narrative, which is the voice of the people and their demands.
Well, thank you so much, Omaid. And let me now just turn to Cynthia exactly with the same question. How does she find alternative arguments, persuasive alternatives with the young people that she tries to bring into politics to indeed be the voice of the voiceless, as Omaid has just said? Is this working in Nigeria? Cynthia.
And I think we lost the connection with Cynthia at the moment.
Oh, what a pity. But let me then turn the question to Anne again, because I think we just got the view of Omaid about the power of culture and art and going out into the streets and being the voice of the voiceless. Anne points out the importance of humor as well, in the not just mocking the narrative of the populists, but also in building a new narrative to unite people where they that crave for union and not to make the. Oh, I see Cynthia is here. Is it so? If so, Cynthia, you have the floor before I pass to Anne.
Okay. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't get the question, but I want to believe it's a question on generational aspects. I was logged out.
Go ahead.
All right. Okay, yeah, thank you, and really it's an honor to be part of the panel today discussing democratic narratives, especially because of what the threats to democracy in our world today. And yes, there are generational aspects to today's crisis of trust. And I'll look at it from different angles. Generally, there's that discontent with quality of leadership, and even different generations questioning the value of democracy. I'm talking from the Nigerian perspective, and that is because I'm coming from a military, a history of military dictatorship and moving into democracy in 1999. There was a lot of expectations, and there was a lot of expectation from the government. However, what has happened is that over a period of time from 1999 till date, what we've had is that constantly the government has taken a new posture, which is becoming more exclusionary in their conduct, and beyond that also the failure to deliver on dividends of democracy, which is what is raising this general discontent across generations. However, beyond that is that generational blame game and mutual mistrust. Now, why is this important? And I'll put that in line with a non-alignment of purpose with my generation. We call ourselves the millennials. There's the generation Z, the Gen Z, on the younger ones. And then we also have the generation X, those before us, and then the boomers, who were those who fought for independence in Nigeria. Now, why this mutual distrust and why this different conceptualization of democracy? So for those of us in the millennials, most of us growing up, we had an idea there was a military dictatorship. But by the time we were older and mature to understand what was, and we saw people going to the polls to vote. And we're told that democracy answers questions like better economy, democracy answers questions like peaceful participation, free expression. It came with a lot of gifts to the people. However, and then this whole narrative of, oh, you are the leaders of tomorrow. But one of the things we had seen was, as with each elections, with each government constitution, was more like a recycling of leadership. For instance, Nigeria, country with a young population, same also is the continent, Africa, young population, but in the continent alone, the average age of leader is 65, while our average age of the population is 25 years. So now there's this disconnect between those who are in government and the younger ones asking themselves, okay, so if democracy is about the people and we are the majority, when do we get in and when do we become part of that system to define the narrative? Now, let us also bear in mind that the conversation when it comes to democracy, what the political leaders have mastered is to build a narrative of division. Why is that important for them? Because for political leaders, staying in power is important, and the more divided the people are, the better they can manipulate the system to suit their needs. And what young people were saying with Not Too Young to Run, for instance, was we are part of the system and we want to change it. And for this time around, we're going to unite with one voice to demand inclusion. Not Too Young to Run story basically was an attack Nigerians push for office, and because before it needed to be 35 in Nigeria, but with the passage of the law, the age was reduced. Hello?
Yes? We're not hearing you too well.
Did you lose me? Okay, yeah.
Please conclude. We're not hearing you too well, but maybe
yes.
you.
Okay. All right. So for Not Too Young, the idea was, how do we get people into government? Because we needed more young people to define democratic narratives. For us, unity was important, and because the politics of division was not benefiting the population. And so it was about, how do we get young people in government? Now, the next slide shows that what we had after the general elections did not translate to more younger people winning, but we got an increase in number of persons. And that leads me to the next point of the dilemma of political participation, which is informed by how different generations interpret their realities. So it's one thing to vote, but if these votes do not translate to quality leadership, if this vote does not translate to representation in office, then how can we say it is truly democratic? So for us, for different generations, the question is, how do you ensure that you promote intergenerational leadership across generation, be it the younger generation, which you call Generation Z, who at the moment are also pushing to be included, because there's the conversion around, if I'm old enough to vote, why can't I contest for office? So you see the younger ones also saying, I'm 18, I can vote, but I want to also be in government because there I represent the views of my people. Beyond that is also the gender aspect to this. So in promoting democracy, if inclusion is not at the core, and then we cannot say we've achieved democracy. And what we need to start pushing now, that democracy by its nature is about inclusion, and it's beyond just numbers for majority. It's about intergenerational representation in government. It's about gender equality and representation of women in government. Because until we achieve all of that, what we'll still have is the political elites who have been in power for years and who want to remain in power. They will continually hold on to power, and we young people, young Africans, young people of the world, we need to say, no, we need to define the democracy that we want, because for us, democracy is representation, its inclusion, and it can only be sustainable when there's intergenerational leadership.
Great. Cynthia, thank you for bringing out these very crucial points that are relevant for Africa, but not only for Africa. But that brings me to, I know that Anne will have to leave soon. So Anne, how do we make the case for democracy? How do, understanding that division is part of the strategy of populisms, how do we bring back bridge the people in re-energize democracy? What should be the narrative?
So thank you for that question. I'm almost embarrassed to answer it on a call with so many activists who are doing exactly that. I mean, I think Cynthia knows better the answer in Nigeria than I do, and Bobi in Uganda. So, you know, I really defer to them. I mean, I do think there are some things that we've learned over the last few years. One of them, I think Garry said, is not to play into the division, not to repeat the polarization. You know, find ways to change the subject, you know, to move the topic on, and if possible, to move to real life. I mean, get people to talk about the issues around them, things they can see, whether it's something banal like potholes in their roads, or, you know, their electricity not working, or, you know, or the way the virus is being dealt with. If you can get people to move to, you know, to deal with reality and to talk about reality, and not to talk about the fictions and the, you know, the kind of magical clashes between good and evil that you're seeing online. I mean, the more that you can do that, the better off you are. I mean, also, again, some of these answers will depend on the country, but remember that the important thing for people is not just the message, but it's the messenger. So what Democrats should be doing is should be trying to create communities of trust. So, you know, what is it that I need to do to get people to trust me? How do I tap into what they're most anxious about, they're most afraid of? How do I reassure them and offer them, you know, and offer them some sense of safety and community? You know, we can't always be, you know, the people knocking things down. We also have to offer an alternative. You know, if I'm gonna persuade you to leave the camp of the dictator and to come over into our camp, I have to persuade you that there's something there to belong to, that you're going to find, you know, the values that you're looking for on our side. And, you know, and then as Anna mentioned, and, you know, already there are ways in which you can deflate authoritarian narratives. You know, you can make fun of them. You know, you don't have to just say, that's not true, that's not true. You can just laugh at it. And sometimes that's more effective. You know, you can use humor, you can use, you know, you can use art, as we've just heard we've just heard being done in Omaid doing in Afghanistan. You can find, you know, you can find other ways to unite people with music, art, with history, with telling stories about the past that bring people together. So, you know, there is an element of creativity, and as I said, I don't think the answer is the same for every country. But what we want, the main point, and I'll just say it again, is not to get sucked into the narrative that's put out by the dictator or the autocrat or the illiberal leader. Not to you know, play into the polarization game. You know, not to, you know, if he says, you know, homosexuality is evil, you know, of course that's a terrible thing and we are opposed to that, but let's also talk about a broader issue. Let's get away from that subject. Let's move to other subjects that don't make people so inflamed and angry. You know, let's switch the frame so that we can talk about things that unite us instead of things that divide us.
Well, thank you, Anne. I don't know if any other participant would like to add on this. I must say that from our audience, we got a lot of questions on technology, the role of technology, and as well how to build these persuasive alternatives and persuasive arguments for democracy. So is there any of the participants wanting to come in now? Yeah. Garry?
Oh,
Garry?
sorry, I wanted to.
On technology.
Okay, Garry and then Cynthia. Garry?
I was waiting for Cynthia to answer.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So I think quickly, so just looking at the COVID era, what have we seen on social media and what has gotten the interest of young people, the current social media challenge, and what has that can begin in one part here and it has to trend even in Africa. Now, social media, beyond just providing a platform for communication, is beginning to break barriers and make borders almost seem inexistent. And what are we learning from that? So part of the things we need to start pushing is to promote democratic narratives. We need to get the younger generation to become champions of this conversation. They need agency on how to push that. So we're looking at adopting the influence of pop culture and in building that sense of community by creating a world promotes an identity based on democratic narrative. So we want to build an identity that's based on specific democratic values. So social media challenges are wonderful and it's good to drive trends, but what we want is how do we get these trends to start informing behaviors and character and start leading movements in different spaces. So that is one point. I'll give an example with the recent album released by Beyonce, Black is King. Now, Black is King for some reason have gotten a lot of Black people across the world, be not just in the US, in Africa, to connect to a particular message that your identity it's important and you need to push for that. But within the context, what are we seeing? That even in music albums, there's a lot of collaboration across countries, across continents. So Black is King had lots of singers from Africa, and from Nigeria we had the Burna Boy's album had singers from within Africa. Now, what is this telling us? That young people listen to an album, they connect to that. The musician doesn't necessarily have to come from where they are, but the message is clear and it's about we want to promote an identity. So what can we learn for those of us who work within the development space? That we are in an era of sound bites. We're in the era where younger people are no longer interested in long keynote addresses or keynote speech. They want to get the message, they want it to trend, but they also want to feel like they are the media themselves, they are the promoters of that message. So we need to start learning from pop culture and leveraging on the learnings from this space to influence participation within the democratic space. The other is technology. As technology advances, we also need to start building young people that are beyond just voters, but also can deploy technology to demand accountability and to track government promises and to focus on how do we sector society, so from the urban to the rural, because within the community we have different sectors. There are those with access to information, there are those who do not have access to information, and I believe that the power actually lies in the youth, because the generation that we have coming after us, that generation has they have a powerful tool of building social movements and leading change in different sectors. And if we can get them to take charge of promoting democracy, I believe that in those spaces, as they inform and influence trends, democratic narratives can actually begin to drive conversations, and we can have younger leaders taking responsibilities and taking agencies in their sectors and communities.
Thank you, Cynthia. Now let me go to Garry. Do you see actually young people?
But look, after hearing so many vibrant voices supporting democracy, I believe that more than ever that the answer is to make technology work for democracy, not against it. But we should remember from history that when new technology arrives, it's always easier to make weapons than to harness it for more creative and productive things. It can take a long time to develop these societal norms and regulatory structures that needed to incorporate powerful new technology in our lives without danger. So it's not surprising that social media was weaponized before we could really see it and stop it. And the problem is that our technology is accelerating at the speed of Moore's law, but our political process is following Parkinson's law. So we have more bureaucracy expanding to feed the time available instead of getting faster and more responsive to the people's needs. People are connected instantly today. They can shout their opinions to the world and find others who share them, and also be reached by hostile actors spreading disinformation. And meanwhile, our political parties and systems, they have not sped up at all. And so these activities take place where? On private platforms like Facebook and Twitter, and shaped this narrative shaped by giant companies like Apple and Google. They do have a responsibility, but we should also realize that this is a role that has been abdicated by the governments, by the international institutions. It's now like a Wild West. And what we need sheriffs who are quick on the draw.
Thank you, Garry. Now let's listen to Bobi. And Bobi, do you think that all this energy with these young people that you're being able to mobilize is going to turn in votes? Are these people going to go and vote and demand voting for you, namely?
I was listening.
I'm going to Bobi first and then to Larry.
Sure, thank you. I was very well represented by Cynthia. Thank you, Cynthia, for your submission. Indeed, in the past, young people have been greatly bored by the long formal speeches that explains why many young people had been disconnected from what matters. And sadly, in the past, music has not been well utilized to address issues that matter. Of course, we have special cases like Fela Kuti, cases like Miriam Makeba, cases like Bob Marley and others that highlighted music and focused it to where it's supposed to address, because it's important to know that music addresses reality. Music is more like the reflection of society. So our ability to disseminate these messages has, one, helped, but also been to the detriment of the people, in my context, the people of Uganda. It has helped because it has gotten people interested. Messages that wouldn't have otherwise been able to make their way to the eyes and minds of the people have done so. It must be noted that in my context in Uganda, all formal political communication has been banned and has been systematically sidelined. It is only through music that we've been able to smuggle the message of freedom, the message of democracy to the eyes and ears of the people. And that explains why, in my context of Uganda, social media now is taxed. And as if that is not enough, the government in Uganda is moving to regulate social media pages and Facebook. As we speak now, I must get a license. First of all, I pay a fee to even be here. I pay a fee, I pay a tax of 200 shillings to use Facebook, to use Instagram and all other medias. However, because the young people are so, connected and gravitating towards social media and technology, now the government has actually issued a notice that all of us need to get a license before we can communicate on our social media handles. So that explains that technology, yes, it is being embraced right now, but it is also being utilized to limit the people, and it's being weaponized by the regime against the people. Against popular culture, music, dance, drama, poetry, painting, etc., I see it as the future. Today, I am representing the biggest number of people, of young people in Uganda. Why? Because of the music, because of the art, because this is something that gravitates to them. It does not present itself in a formal way, but it finds itself addressing the core issues that all people find so dear, especially the young people. So yes, art and technology is the future. I must also, as I close, address all the rigging exercise and machinery that is being done here in Uganda. While we go into the election, there's every effort to rig elections, and Ugandans only depend on social media. As a person, there's been limitations, not going to radio and TV stations. Why? Because it drives in the young people. Now, it is music, it is art, it is technology, it is social media and the internet that is driving young people to pick interest and in the election, and indeed to recognize that they have the power and they can maximize it through ways that are not the usual contemporary ways.
Thank you, Bobi. And of course, we hope that they will use to go and vote for you. Now, Larry, would you like to Larry, would you like to wrap it up? Because you're in California, the homeland of these big social platforms that people are seeing.
Let me say, Bobby would be a big hit here in California, and someday when he's president of Uganda, we will bring him here to speak on the Stanford University campus, or even before. But Anna, there's another point I wanted to make, which I think will complement well what's been said, including the latest contribution, Bobi Wine. I think that we need to recognize that democracy is both a method for choosing leaders and a set of institutions and rules for affirming and protecting freedom. And we need to use the words freedom, human rights, rule of law, transparency, accountability, and so on, much more than we sometimes do in this context. You know, authoritarian rulers can and do manipulate the dialogue to get people to fear political competition, and they stigmatize the opposition and so on. But the soft underbelly of their appeal and their rule is that they leave people insecure for their rights and robbed of their dignity because they're treated like slaves and they're treated like children. And if you use the language of, to go back to the original struggle for popular sovereignty in Africa, of liberation, and of course the post-1990 wave of democratization in Africa was called the Second Liberation. So I think what we're dealing with now in Uganda, in Ethiopia, in Sudan, in the struggle that Cynthia is a part of to get real democracy and not the semi-democracy that they have in Nigeria, is a third liberation. And people need to understand that there is no instance ever in the world, it just hasn't even existed. And please don't give me Rwanda or Singapore as a counterexample of an authoritarian regime doing a good job of defending human rights, or even providing a rule of law. They don't do it. Kagame is a pure fraud in this regard. He goes around the continent and elsewhere hunting down his opponents and murdering them. And he's much more corrupt than the international community understands. So if we make this case that it's not just about democracy as political competition and the right to vote, it's that political competition and the right to vote in the free and fair elections that Bobby is struggling for are a method to secure freedom, accountability, transparency, control of corruption, and ultimately human dignity. I think that is a winning message that these autocrats cannot push back against.
Well, thank you so much, Larry. I think you wrapped wonderfully the debate. I can say the same. It's not just about Africa. It's about Europe. It's about the United States,
Sure.
where democracy is not just about elections. It's indeed delivering on freedom of the media, freedom of expression, but as well human rights and integrity in governance. Transparency, fight against corruption. And that's exactly what has been feeding the narrative of the populists, is that they are building on this, the flaws that we have seen by many people who have been democratically elected but do not live up to the expectations of the people and to the needs of the people and to the virtues of democracy. Without further ado, let me just thank all the participants. It has been a very inspiring debate, this international participation, and we need now to listen to my good friend Carl Gershom from the National Endowment for Democracy, and Kevin Casas-Zamora, who is the Secretary General of International IDEA, who fights for elections but with integrity as a tool for democracy. And so let's listen to them. I I just would like to thank you for giving me this opportunity to moderate this debate. It was really inspiring for me to listen to all of you. Thank you. Ryota?
No, this is Carl.
Oh, hi, Carl.
Okay. Thank you, Anna, and thanks for moderating it so well under such difficult circumstances from your automobile, from your car. It's been terrific. It's been a wonderful discussion. And let me just try to briefly to summarize the main points. I think Anne opened it up very well by, by just talking about the way in which Russia, with its information warfare, and China with its sharp power and United Front influence operations, have made the values of freedom and human rights, that what Larry just talked about. This is now, in the contemporary world, this has become the new terrain of strategic competition in the world. We've entered a new era in this way, where values have become at the center of political and strategic competition in the world. And then people talk very well about the way to fight this battle. You can't, as Garry said, allow the demagogues to define the issues. It has to be defined in what Larry called a positive vision of what the possibilities are, how to transcend populism. But we also need, in the democracies, we need good governance. And here, I think, what I think was the main point of all of our speakers, Bobi, Cynthia, and Omaid, that all of them were emphasizing that there is in the world today, and I think this is really because of social media and the spread of information and communications, a massive demand for rights, which of course the dictators are fighting against. And this is expressed through music, through art, through technology, and that young people, as Cynthia emphasized, and women are demanding participation. And so the struggle is going to be about rights, freedom, inclusion, values. And that's what the center of the world struggle is today, and the demand for these values is increasing, which I think should give us hope. One final point, as we look to the future, I think we haven't really talked about specific struggles today, but I want to emphasize that the struggle going on in Belarus today and the struggle going on in Hong Kong, the threat to Taiwan, which is an alternative to China as a Confucian Chinese democracy, these are extremely critical struggles. A struggle, of course, in Afghanistan, in Afghanistan where you have negotiations, or in Uganda where you have elections coming up, these are critical too. And the important thing today, which we have to remember, is to stand with the activists who are on the front lines of this struggle. And that means Nicholas Apoyo in Uganda and all of the thousands upon thousands of people who are with him. It means Svetlana Alexievich, who is now locked in her home, the Nobel Laureate in Belarus, and threatened by the regime. She's the last remaining member in freedom of the Presidium of the Coordinating Council of the Belarusian leadership, be standing with Joshua Wong and others in Hong Kong. This solidarity, I think, and the struggle in specific situations for freedom and dignity and rights are going to determine the outcome of the struggle. We have a gigantic job to do in our democracies, especially here in the United States. We're not doing very well in terms of our performance. We're not doing well in many other respects. We have to do better. We have to come back. We have to be able to be part of the struggle. But the inspiration for this struggle today is coming from on the ground in one country after another. And because the demand is so strong for freedom and democracy and human rights, I think there is hope for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Carl. Now, I'd like to invite Kevin Casas-Zamora. He's the Secretary General of the International IDEA. Under his leadership, International IDEA, NED, World of Democracy, and many other democracy and human rights organizations actually launched the call to defend democracy that people talked about earlier today. This statement basically highlights COVID-19 crisis. It's not just about health crisis, and it is about political crisis, as we've been talking about for the last 90 minutes or so. So now I'd like to invite Kevin to make a closing remarks. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you so much, Ryota, Carl, colleagues, friends, and I have to say that I'm humbled to be here with so many activists that are really the important people here, because you guys are in the front lines of the struggle to build and preserve a democracy around the world. I mean, we are here to discuss a battle of narratives that we need to win if we want democracy to prevail. The good news is that the case for democracy remains strong, as we've seen here. And now, at the risk of repeating some of the things that have been said here, I would simply like to mention three key arguments that, in my view, we need to hammer over and over and over. The first one is an argument that Carl has very much insisted upon, and that happens to be crucial in the current pandemic. To a much greater degree than any other political system, democracy allows for the correction of policies. This is a function of its allowing the free circulation of information, but also of the possibilities for collective action that are built into the system. And also of the transient nature of democratic political power. In a democracy worth its salt, you know that you have the chance to throw the rascals out and change course every 4 or 5 years. Rooting for authoritarian systems is like going to a high-stakes casino. You may strike gold and end up with Lee Kuan Yew, but you may not be so lucky and end up locked into the room with Idi Amin or Pol Pot with no possibility for correction. Correctability matters. The second argument is an empirical one that comes from our Global State for Democracy report that we put out every 2 years here at International IDEA. Democracy matters for key tenets of development. It matters in particular for gender equality. When you classify the 162 countries covered by our report, and you classify those into democracies, hybrid regimes, and authoritarian systems, and you examine the performance of each group when it comes to gender equality, the disparity that you find is truly remarkable. Whereas only 3% of democracies do really, really poorly when it comes to gender, 10% of hybrid regimes and fully 50% of authoritarian systems do. Moreover, we know that sustainable development runs through gender equality. Therefore, if we stand any chance whatsoever of achieving the 2030 agenda for sustainable democracy, for sustainable development, we must protect democracy. Sustainable development requires sustainable democracy. The third argument is simply that to a greater degree than any other political system, and this has been mentioned here by Larry, democracy treats us as something more than underage dupes. In doing so, it respects our agency and inherent dignity. To those out there that are keen to follow the mirage of order provided by some authoritarian regimes, and that are willing to discount democratic institutions as dispensable luxuries in the quest for material well-being, I've got one answer for you: Hong Kong. For some time now, the people that are bravely demonstrating in the streets of Hong Kong, and also Belarus now, by the way, are showing that, as the French writer Antoine de Saint-Exupéry rightly put it, humankind is not merely a herd that expects to be fed. What is in crisis is not the case for democracy, but rather the idea that the spread of democracy is inevitable. The truth is that there's nothing inevitable about the advance of democracy. The notion that all human beings are endowed with equal dignity and with the same right to participate in collective decisions. The notion that political power ought to be limited if it is to remain legitimate. The idea that the best protection for human dignity is not tribal bonds, but the existence of a body of rights protected by law in the face of which we are all equal. All of those are very new ideas that in many respects swim against powerful tides in human nature. Inequality, the exercise of raw power, and allegiance to tribe and to those that are and look exactly like us are the historical norm. We should always remember that the spread of democracy is an enormous victory against sinister forces in our nature. Now, all those ancestral forces are rearing their head again in different places. The preservation of democracy demands a lot from us every day, lest we let the jungle grow back. This is the twilight struggle that we have in our hands. And as our call to defend democracy states, we need to muster the courage and build the global coalitions to prevail. Knowing full well that while the values we defend are eternal, victories are always transitory, and the friends we encounter along the way are often fickle, as Applebaum's wonderful new book shows so eloquently. Now, more than ever, we must dare to make the case for democracy with conviction and with a sense of urgency. It is a case that has not lost 1 ounce of its power to inspire and give hope and light in this time of darkness. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carl and Kevin, for being a great partner to put this event together. So thank you so much. And I hope today's discussion has given all of you, the audience and the panelists, some insight and inspiration, how to fight back this narrative that we've been talking about. How do we project positive vision for our society using various tools that we have, technologies, pop culture, art, and so on. So thank you very much for all of you attending this event, raising interesting questions. We ask everybody to ask questions as you registered for this event. I hope we'll be able, we've been able to answer some of these questions that you brought to us. Thank you for all the speakers for your time and sharing your expertise and experience. I'd like to take a moment to thank some of these great colleagues to help this event organized. First, I'd like to thank Laura Thornton, Nuno Duraro, Adina Trunk of International IDEA, thank you. Jody Harman, Zach Evans, and Jane Larry Jacobson at NED, thank you so much for helping us to promote this event. And the World Movement staff members, namely Shirin Abad, Kayla Bushi, Megan Bakker, Danny Eigerman, Matt Arnold, and Troy Johnson for helping me to put this event and making this event a great success. So thank you so much, everybody, and stay connected with the World Movement for Democracy by following us, Twitter at Move Democracy and Facebook at World Movement for Democracy. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.